Welcome. This is a Public Works podcast. My name is Joseph Blackman. Today, got a real treat for you. Her name is Shannon Sorrell, and she is the Director of Parks and Recreation with the City of Whitehall in Ohio. Shannon, say what's up to everybody.
Hey guys, it's great to be here. Thanks, Joe, for having me on today.
For sure. So it's cool because you're the director of Parks and Rec. I don't have that many Parks and Rec interviewees on, so we could talk about all things Parks and Recreation and all that fun stuff. So let's start it off this way. What is the average Tuesday like for Shannon? Like, what are you doing all day?
Well, in Parks and Recreation, I think we're always busy, right? And so it's a lot of team strategizing. We are looking at increasing our revenue development programs in our community now that we've built a strong mission-based set of programs, and really just wrapping around with my team, trying to figure out some new strategies coming into this next year. Like everybody else in Public Works, it may be August, but I got to get the 2024 budget together. And so we're really thinking budget right now for the next year or two.
Okay, so you said revenue development, and when I think of Parks and Recreation, I don't really think of revenue generating that much. So let's talk more about it. Is it, when I think of my local city, they charge for us to use like the parks around town, they charge for us to use like some of the recreation centers. Is that what you mean by generating revenue?
A lot of times, yeah, those fee-based programs are essential to revenue generation in Parks and Recreation. And in Ohio, we're income tax funded as municipalities. So one of the key strategies to sustaining Parks and Recreation is diversifying the money that supports us. So that means we have to look at sponsorships and grants, which we've done a great job at. And now we're really looking at creating some fee-based programs for ourselves.
Cool. I like it. So, again, Parks and Recreation, it's outdoor. I mean, it's, when you think of the green, the trees and the big fields for people to play in, the playgrounds and stuff like that. Like, how often do you get out and see, like, some of the parks and walk through some of the grass and do that stuff? Or is it mainly you're just behind the computer banging out emails all day?
My position as our director, unfortunately requires a lot of formal time, just like every other administrator. We're a department that I do have boots on the ground and people who are able to run our programs. But, last weekend I did pop into the senior center and hang out with that crew and play chair volleyball while I was also trying to get emails and meetings set up. So it's a balance. There's a lot of being present at community events and community programs, as well as also going out and working with partners. So it's a good mix. We're not stuck anywhere, but we don't always get to be outside all the time.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right, so let's dig into more of Shannon's backstory. Let's talk about your career path. I mean, was the 15-year-old, 18-year-old Shannon, were you interested in Parks and Recreation? Like, what was your trajectory from high school to where you're at today?
Absolutely not. I got in trouble when the first job I had in City Parks and Recreation, I got myself in trouble because a kid overheard me say, "I'm never working in Parks and Recreation again. This is too much like daycare and not enough like camps." I came up in camps, right? And the irony, because now I've spent 17 years in Public Works and I love it. I came up working in camps and taking kids who, inner city youth into the outdoors, and got to spend a lot of time really seeing the impact that those environments and those experiences had on people and on families, and how kids who had never played in the woods were now sleeping outside 2 or 3 nights a week. And it was really, really neat. In college, I started off, in the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University and ended up with an accounting degree. I loved the concepts of accounting and finance. And I went that way because in my crazy brain at the time, I was trying to find a way to help nonprofits like I had worked for, earlier in life, improve their operations and run more efficiently. Though trying to explain that as a 21-year-old coming out of college to people, they just didn't get it 20 years ago, right? I think it's a lot more commonplace in government and nonprofit to want that strategy today. but let's just say I was ahead of the curve, or I just didn't know how to communicate it well enough at the time. So after being an accountant for a year, I decided that was not my world. I could crunch numbers all day, but I really didn't want to crunch numbers all day. So I went and got a master's in Parks and Recreation from North Carolina State. And there I took all of that experience and helped develop the first tee of Wake County. It was starting off as a really small organization. I worked with a professional golf program at NC State. I'm still, I fake golfing, but it was not what I was passionate about. I was passionate again about this gave me the opportunity to help others do character development with kids and develop budgets and do all the, back room stuff that comes with running an organization. And I was lucky once I graduated, or as I was graduating, to have civil service tested really well for a position close to my hometown in Ohio. And because of my score, they decided to interview me. And lucky me, I ended up getting a job where they trusted me now to run a golf course, and run pools and run some youth programming. And over the years that translated into me helping. By the time I left the city of Gahanna in central Ohio, I was running the department's numbers and budgets and helping forecast. I had a seasonal and full-time, part-time staff that upwards of 230 people that would, when you're running big camps and you're running 1 million gallons of outdoor pool water, there's a lot of people to make that stuff happen. And so it was a really neat operation. Through that time frame, I also did a lot of business development there because I was working in Gahanna when our economy crashed, back around 2008 to 2012. It really impacted our local governments and like it did everywhere. And we really took the opportunity, instead of shutting down operations, to redevelop operations. And we, being at least, 55 to 60% tax subsidy, our money was not what we needed it to be to keep going. Income tax dollars dropped out the bottom. And so we had to redevelop services and pools, golf courses, senior centers. It's a whole different business plan and approach when you're trying to make money in those worlds versus having them be heavily tax subsidized. And so we redeveloped what we were doing. And that was an amazing experience. I think it was really helpful. It helped me it relied heavily on thinking out of the box and working with my team to find new ways to do stuff. As everyone heard for a long time, you've got to do more with less. And that's not always easy. But the team there did an amazing job, and they're still doing an amazing job. And about 7 years ago, a position in a neighboring community came open, and I was so excited to join the group there because it was a very underserved community with some demographic trends that just, were not the communities I'd worked in before, but were more like that nonprofit route that I had gotten into this field for to begin with. And so when I came in, there was a lot of deferred maintenance and underutilized facilities and lack of programs and lack of interdepartmental and community relationships in Parks and Rec services. And so for the last 7 years, I've got to build a team, build a program, work with the team, build them up, connect across the community. And for being a small community, we are definitely a thriving program, and we have this great mission, mission-based programs. We got our 5th graders back into our own parks for environmental ed versus going other places. So their 5th grade camp happens in their own backyards, which is awesome. We've got sports programs that we're up and running in a very safe and high quality manner. We have partnered with the YMCA of Central Ohio, and our community has a vibrant activity center that is growing and seeing more and more activity there. And now this year, we've really focused on strategic partnerships to increase the authentic nature of what we're doing. So programs that are more representative, we will be partnering to offer, to host the Central Ohio Caribbean Day. We did the community's first Juneteenth celebration with a ton of community leadership and partners coming in to be the face and the spirit behind that program. We partnered with a nonprofit called Real Situations Incorporated and the African American Wellness Association and did 5 weeks of high school basketball from 6 to 9 or 10 p.m. in our parks that featured developing police and teen relationships. And we had something like 14 local high schools participate. It was unreal. And so really, really vibrant community, and our Parks and Recreation is finally starting to be as vibrant as our community. It's really
Wow.
cool.
Okay. So, yeah, you said a lot, and there's a couple things I wanted to pick out of there to kind of touch on. So the accountant degree, and then your proclivity or your attraction to the nonprofit side of things.
Mm-hmm.
How have you leveraged those two, I guess, skill sets, or those two affinities to be able to do what you're doing today? Because I can tell you crunch numbers, and then you love the nonprofit side, and now you're in Parks and Rec, which is kind of has that nonprofit vibe to it, like you're doing for the community. And then accounting, like how have you leveraged those to help yourself be successful?
I think there's a few strategies there. Having a fluency and a financial acumen that helps me to understand citywide budgets, being able to develop and track income plans or expense management is huge. It is a skill set that is not necessarily natural to a lot of people in the programming world or the, parks and forestry world, because it's a very different skill set. And I'm fortunate that I grew up in the outdoors and, with blueprints on my table. So I picked up a lot of stuff along the way. It's what my parents' interests and passions. And then what that does is that allows me to speak to decision makers and the public and present information in a way that can be digested not just by our financial minded leadership or decision makers, but also turn around, that environmental ed interp background allows me to tailor it to the public or tailor it to my team or tailor it to my commission in a way that makes sense for them as well. And then the nonprofit world, I really believe we are all here to make a difference. And I want to be in a role where I'm able to serve and influence positive change and give people a platform. And that has been the joy of what I've got to do for the last 7 years. It has really just been this community-minded, looking at the needs, working with leadership, and helping use that financial acumen to say, well, here's pretty accurately where we can go, or here's things we should think about so that we can offset expenses in a different way.
Gotcha. And because every city probably has some type of parks and recreation component within public works. Where do you find your inspiration from? Like, where do you find, like, I love the idea about the 6 to 10 p.m. getting the youth, the high school, because that we know what they're doing at 6 to 10 p.m. and it ain't good in the summer. And getting
Right.
and pairing them with local PD and saying, hey, we're going to make this relationship a little bit stronger. And then also getting them off the streets at that time. So, like, where do these ideas come from? Let's say we handed you the keys, like we all go to Mars, and like, Shannon, you are the director of Parks and Recreation for the whole planet of Mars. Where do you start?
So I'd start where I started here. I sought out the people who were already doing things. Our school resource officers and our community police sergeant. I made sure at least once a year I meet with them and say, hey guys, what are you seeing? What do you need? And my question with them, with the school board, with other community organizations, I never left a room that I didn't ask, how can Parks and Recreation help you? Because I don't know. I didn't know. And would be shallow of me to assume that I knew what I needed without ever asking a question. And it developed a trust and it developed a confidence. So, this past spring, when my community police sergeant, Sergeant Earl, happened to come across somebody who was looking for a place for this basketball program, he said, we're calling Shannon now. That's what you want in my role. You want people to call and say, we see what you're doing, or we believe in what you've done. What do you think about this? And bring it to the table. These programs can't all be generated by me, shouldn't all be generated by me. And that's how we're a platform. right? We have these amazing spaces. We have the facilities. So if I tried to create that program, it would have cost me more money. I wouldn't have had the connections. I couldn't have done it in as authentic as a way as, having a local coach call all the coaches and bring them to the table.
Wow.
It was really, it's really about listening and then capitalizing on opportunities, because when doors open, you can't guarantee they'll wait till next budget cycle.
Yeah.
And convincing the leadership that it's worth walking through those doors with me.
Sure.
That can be one of the hardest things in public works, is you're not the sole decision maker. Even as a director, I have 7 commissioners, 7 council people, a mayor, a city manager, and assistant city manager. I need them all on board, plus the chief of police in that situation. So it's a lot of relationships, and it's a lot of making sure when we commit to something, we do it of quality and it's a good experience for the public.
Yeah. Let's say you're mentoring a youngster. They're fresh out of college. They want to be you one day. They want to be able to take, that part of Ohio and make it pop, make it blow up, make it something. Because my local, where I'm from, Pittsburgh, California, I remember certain events that the city did for kids, and we had a blast. And it's like that stuff sticks with us, and it's formative. It can change who you are depending on what kind of projects you're into. But let's say you're mentoring somebody younger, and they ask you, like, what one skill set should I pick up to be successful at what Shannon's doing? What would you tell them that skill set will be?
So I'm a big believer in developing skill sets that will generate personal revenue, because we all have to have an income, right?
Amen.
And I tell every young person, go into aquatics to start. Aquatics, there is not a campus rec center that does not have a pool. And so go at 14, 15, 16, as soon as you can. A lot of places will pay for your lifeguard certifications now. It teaches you how to handle stress. It teaches you how to deal with the boredom, because you are, and that's important. And you will immediately have the opportunity to move up into local management of that site. They need pool managers every summer. They need people and then you start to learn a technical skill set, because you're there evenings and weekends. Pumps need adjusted. Machines need taken care of. You learn the basic site maintenance. And so that's very transferable to anywhere else you could go. And you're guaranteed to have a job through college, because they're always short pool management staff.
I love it. Skill sets that you can monetize. Love it.
My pool managers over the years are now sergeants and police, in police forces. They are FBI special agents. They have, are completing their PhDs and going off to be college professors. And I really think it just teaches you because you have to lead among your peers in that role. And that's a big deal. So that's where I tell people to start, especially at that age. So, and then I always say, get a high-level degree of some sort to go with it. In parks and recreation, you can end up where I am through a number of paths. So develop your hard skills, develop your soft skills, and then get an MBA, get an MPA, get a engineering or an accounting degree, because those are things, eventually I had to go back and get a parks and recreation degree. But if you start in one of those other areas, it's easier than a master's in one of those areas. Wow.
Makes sense. I like that. It changes my perspective on life, girls. And I get it, because at that young age, you're over so much. And granted, not too many instances where you're actually diving in the pool and saving someone's life, but that's your job. Like, that is a lot to be on your shoulders. At 15, 14, 16 years old, it's huge. And then like moving up from there. So that's pretty interesting perspective. All right. So it's story time. I need a story from Shannon of when something went wrong under your watch, what you did to fix it, and then what lessons you learned from it. And then also a lesson all of the listeners who are in Parks and Rec, they can learn from it to apply to the future career.
Man, that's a heavy one. And I should have looked at this beforehand.
I know you got tons of stories. Come on now.
I do.
When the
I have
pool turned green, like, all the trees fell down. Come on.
Right. I think a really common one is because we're very heavily in partnership, provision of services. And so one of the things that happens quite often with partnerships is you'll get some, and this is relationship management. So you'll get a partner come to the table and they say they're going to do all of these things, you know, all 5 of these things to make something happen. And I'm not going to use specifics because that's not fair to my partners. I want them all to stay happy and look great. But my team and I are always prepared with, okay, here's the entire thing, right? And so for certain events this year, we are in situations where the day of stuff is changing. And with what we do in Parks and Recreation, it's like the Wizard of Oz. No one out there needs to know the mess that's going on back here. And so the challenge is, how do we keep it smooth and how do we keep it looking good? And the lesson is you have to have great relationships with your team and be there to cover for each other. So when your partner doesn't come through or the food truck breaks down, you've got a backup, because you'll have 1,000 people at an event and they need food or they want activities to do, or you know, they're expecting someone to be there to speak. So it's about our lesson in Parks and Recreation is always being ready to roll with it. I don't know if that's a really good one, but you can't get into this world without understanding that everything's going to change 10 times. And it's your relationships are what determine your success there, whether or not you can make it through it. Sure, and I can give you probably, I don't know, I'm trying to think how technical. Do you want a different example that's a lot more technical?
You know, something that like I always like to ask a story question, because there's people out there in your same position, and I'm sure they have stories also. But when you get to tell your story, it brings it home for them, for us, because they can go, oh, if Shannon went through that and that's how she fixed it, maybe if I have something similar, here's how I can fix it, or here's where my brain should go to alleviate the issue.
Okay, so I think one of the best things that you can do as you're moving up is learning to anticipate the communication your decision makers are going to need. So when I went through budget cuts before, it was very top down. And it can be very stressful when you're in an organization and you're in middle management and you are getting these top-down decisions. And so before it was like, well, we're going to cut this and we're going to cut this and all of these different things. And what I learned over time, you know, so that was one of those situations where I'm like, man, this didn't work out. And I hated being in those roles and having to be very reactive or cut staff or cut programs. And what I learned from that was to be ready. So now when budgets change, I walk into every meeting with a proposed plan for that change. And I think that's essential. So, COVID hit, and instead of leadership saying you're going to cut X, Y, and Z, you know, and me coming to that meeting where I knew it was going to be not a great meeting for our budgets, I went to them first and said, here's a plan. Here's what we can do to hit that 20% cut, or what we can immediately freeze to minimize layoffs, to minimize essential services being cut. We are having, you know, some different stuff going on now. And so it's the same approach, going to my leadership before things become critical and having a plan ready for them. Because, and I think that's true at all levels, if you wait for your bosses to make the decision or leadership to make the decision, they will. But if you give them an option that is easier for them, they're gonna choose that every time.
Wow. Okay. I like that. You've been at this for some years. You know, every summer, you know, the snow melts off. You can go, okay, let's start cutting grass. Let's roll some basketballs out there. You know, another summer in Ohio, right? Mm-hmm. Like what makes you want to show up better and better every year? And then what's your personal and professional development regimen like to be able to show up better and better every month, every year?
I think my focus over time has changed, right? When I first got into upper leadership and facility and operations management, it was about proving that I could do those things and that I needed to learn that, right? And so the challenge for me was, how do I show up? How do we hit the numbers? How do we keep coming up with new programs? For me, from there, now my motivation is more showing up for my team. What do they need? What do they understand the goals? Do they understand the resources they have to get there? And instead of me, early on, before they had the experience, it was more like building it with them and then sending them off. And now it's neat several years later to be at the point where I'm like, okay, well, here's the goal. How do you want to get there? And being able to trust them and rely on them. And once we've developed that skill set, then it means our capacity grows. And then we can continue to shift. And instead of being reactive to everything, be intentional about what we're doing, how we're spending our resources. So, and I love my team. I love my staff. They make my job a ball to show up to every day. So, and then what was your other question, Joe?
Well, no, that was the question is how do you show up better and better every year? Like, do you read books? Do you go to seminars? Do you have, how do you, like, what information do you go to grab to say, hey, I can do this more efficiently next year?
I haven't always been great at that. And I know not all of us are great at that all the time. I recently, have had the pleasure. I get to work with American Public Works and National Recreation and Parks Associations and get to teach and contribute to publications and do a lot of cool stuff that way. So that's another reason why I show up, because I'm at this point where I want to build other leaders, not just in my organization, but across the nation. And to do that, I do have to be talking to other innovative leadership in parks and recreation and city leadership and private industry. And so in the past year, I've really focused on making sure I have solid connections. When people say networking, I think it's easy to think, oh, we're just going to chat and go to lunch. But it's steel sharpening steel. You have to have those challenging conversations and have people who are willing to look at you and be like, man, you better rethink that. And you can't always count on that from your staff and from your team. And then it is looking at educational materials, looking at research, following current trends, and trying to figure out what other people are doing and what's working. I'm real big on, I like podcasts because this way I can listen to it as I drive. I'm not always consistent with them, but I'm a huge fan of, 5 to 15 to 20 minute sessions that I can listen to on my drive. And so those are the ways I kind of feed myself. I also think that in all fields, burnout is easy, but burnout in parks and recreation is really hard on staff because we don't clock out at 5 p.m. We are there through, I was there on every Thursday night, and then I'm there on Saturdays, and then we've got a farmer's market on Tuesdays. So my staff are at that, and that's the time they want to be with their families too, or the time I want to be with my family. So it's about having realistic expectations of myself and my team. And if they are going to put the time in to be there, how are we still allowing me and them to be human?
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay. Let's say we ask one of your family members, like, what does Shannon do all day, every day for the city? What value does she add to the community? What would they get totally wrong in answering that question? Like, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about being a Parks and Rec director?
Well, clearly we don't do anything in the winter. It's winter, so we're done with our job. Yeah. We take all winter off. So I think that's a big one, is people think that we're only busy in the summer. And frankly, to do the volume that we do in the summer, as well as maintain other seasonal operations, we are putting in hours in that off season to get contracts, partnerships, agreements, bands, staff. I mean, we start hiring for June staff in February.
Wow.
And that way we make sure we're fully staffed, and we're a small department compared to most. So I think that's a lot of it, is people also don't understand the organizational structure that it takes to run it, right? Like the numbers and the processing and all of those pieces, so that we have enough people to run a camp, or we have enough people to mow the grass when we've got 50,000 other things to do as well.
Sure. Okay. All right. Let's say you are commissioned to put up a billboard, and this billboard is going to be in the most trafficked area of Whitehall. What ask of your community in regards to parks and recreation would you put on this billboard?
Do I get to change it through the year, or is it like a 12-month billboard?
No, it's one of those that flips whenever you hit the button. Okay. All right. Change this from winter to summer. Come on.
This time of year, it's going to be, get out, get active, and be in your parks. Come join a program, visit the senior center, work out at the Y, or just go play in the creek. We want people to utilize the things we're doing because we do it for them. And if they're not using it, if they're not playing basketball, they're not on the playgrounds, then that's it. And it's shocking the number of people that don't even know where their closest playground is, or the fact that there's a summer camp at the schools or the YMCA that's available for them. And so it's just, we put them up. I have a billboard in my most trafficked area of town. And it's split into 4x4 sections, and we strategically put different ones up. So in May, in June, come visit the splash pad. In the winter, it's come to the holiday lighting, and it's very much about engagement. And our call to action is come participate, come enjoy.
Yeah. It's funny. Whenever we just moved out from California to Arizona, and that's where I went. I like playing basketball. So I was like, where's the men's league at? Like, my brother's in a softball league. Like, my wife wants to play tennis. Like, I got a 2-year-old. She wants to get active and stuff. So we literally go to the city website and try to figure out what they got going on, which is pretty cool. And if you do a good enough amount of research, a lot of cities do have something going on. So I think that it won't hit you in the face like, hey, come do this. But if you seek it out, you will find it.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
And hopefully we're doing a good job of making it easy to find.
Yeah. The website, you click the tab, you should be able to find it. If you have to look any more than that, then they're not doing a good job.
Yeah.
All right, Shannon. I always like to leave a space on the show for you to thank mentors that you had along your journey, and then also offer up a word of inspiration and motivation to your parks and recreation counterparts.
Of course, I have a lot of mentors to thank along my journey. I am very grateful in my current role to be serving alongside Mayor Kim Maggard, who has worked for served the city of Whitehall as mayor for 12 years now. And this is her last 4 months in office. And we are very excited as we move into transition, but her leadership has been invaluable in my personal career in terms of being a leader who has confidence in her team. And I am very, very grateful for that. I'll also throw it out there. Mike Musser is the poor soul who hired me into this field and had to do a lot of shaping early on in my career. And he is the person I send my staff to now when they need to hear stuff from someone other than me. And so I'm very grateful for his influence and support. And then in terms of a word of encouragement for my fellow Parks and Recreation people, keep doing good. You create the fabric of our communities, and our communities wouldn't be what they are without your service. So thank you.
Sure. And this is totally a curveball. This isn't a scripted question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want. But as you and I both know, last night, 2 nights ago, Maui went, up in flames. So where does a park and recreation director manager go mentally when something like that happens? And then, I guess, what are the first steps to kind of get yourselves through it and out of it?
I think many places in this country, Parks and Recreation serve as frontline support in cases of emergency, alongside our first responders, alongside our service departments. And I don't think most people outside of Parks and Rec realize that. But our first thought is always, oh my gosh, how do we help? How do we help people? How do we provide shelter? What do we need to do for food? We are a critical part of that emergency response. And so fortunately in Ohio, we don't handle forest fires, but we handle derechos and windstorms and tornadoes and floods. And it's okay. Do we need to be opening shelters, or do we need to be visiting restaurants and stores and collecting food for setting up beds? How do we help? And that's where I think, like many other public officials or public leadership, we're there to help and support the emergency response the best we can.
Sure. Thank you for answering that. All right. Well, Shannon, let's say I'm coming to Whitehall and I text you ahead of time. I'm like, hey, Shannon, where can I go to get the best burger in Whitehall? Where are you going to send me?
In the best burger in Whitehall, you are going to actually want to go get a gyro in Whitehall at either King Gyro or the Mad Greek, or you're going to want to try some amazing Ethiopian food at Lila Bella, or go get bubble tea at Racha Tea. So we have some amazing, unique restaurants. We also have a great taco truck whose name I can't remember right now, but my staff frequent. So
I love it. I love it. It's funny. I asked the burger question. Everybody has a different answer for it, which I'm totally open to. I like all food.
We have one or two big chains in our community, but we have a lot of small family owned restaurants that provide a really unique picture of our community.
Cool. All right, Shannon. Well, thank you for hopping on the show. Thank you for sharing your wealth of information and knowledge with us. Any final words before we get out of here?
If anyone has questions, they're welcome to reach out. I'm sure you'll share my contact information. So shoot me an email and I would be happy to answer questions or stay connected. So just let me know. Joe, I really appreciate being here and this has been great. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing, Shannon. All right, to all the listeners out there, make sure you share this with somebody who you think needs to hear it. And I will talk to you soon. This has been the Public Works Podcast.